Hoagland is the only proponent that we have on the list for this bill at this time. So, committee, do you have any questions for the proponent? Representative Miller.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Skoglund, I call your office and I say, I don't have internet. Is that good cause? Or
We
cause?
have actually,
I think it just says cause.
I believe, yes, I think cause is fine. We're not looking to require something like an affidavit or anything like that. There are a number of states that have gone that path.
No.
Where they would
just answer my question. I call up your office. I say, I don't have internet. Is that cause?
I think that if you make a representation to the commission that you do not have reliable enough internet to be able to file electronically, that would be good cause.
It's actually not the commission the way I read this bill, it's to you.
The director, right, but you're making the representation to the agency.
Okay, so I call up, I say I don't have internet. Are you going to say, can you go to the library? Or are you just going to accept that I don't have internet?
It's not my intention to create additional barriers. We don't want anyone to simply use the waiver process to simply avoid the requirement just because of convenience. But certainly we're also not looking to investigate every single instance in which someone represents that they don't have internet access. I don't think that'd be a good use of commission resources, and also the benefit to that would be pretty slim. It'd be my interest to ensure that people, and I really do believe that most candidates would not attempt to utilize the waiver process in that sort of way. I think that if people,
I'm not insinuating that there's anything nefarious about it. I'm just trying to get a handle on what cause is and how far someone is expected to go to access internet, whether that simply means they don't have it or it's inconvenient. I'm just trying to get a feel for what this is because it's not defined.
Right. Typically what happens in these instances is we could pass a regulation that would specify what cause is. I don't see that being necessary today because I don't, frankly, the intention of the exemption is for people without internet access, but there certainly could be other reasons that people might have at the last minute, some sort of need to avoid a mandatory electronic filing requirement. But it's not our position to erect additional barriers for candidates who have issues. We want to find solutions. So that's always been our guiding path, and I think that would be the case here as well. But if clarity were necessary for cause, that would be something we would pass in regulation next year.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, next I have Representative Lee Hahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually feel the same as I believe it was Representative Miller. I don't know, it's harder to see over here in this other room. But I guess my question is, this is absolutely the same. Will it be a simple ask? Yes, I don't have the internet, and then it will be a simple waiver, or is it going to be that in order to rectify the situation, you're going to give steps 1 through 4, and then if that's not, if they still aren't able to access internet, then you'll go ahead and grant the waiver? How hard is this going to be?
Ultimately, that's up to the legislature. If the legislature if you all decide that the standard should be more significant than a mere presentation of cause, other states have included in their statutes the requirement to submit an affidavit of cause. So essentially just signing a document saying, I affirm under my signature that I do not have reliable access to internet or otherwise cannot file this electronically. So if a simple representation of cause is not sufficient for the legislature, that's entirely fine. There's certainly other checks that could be built into the statute, or certainly we can provide regulation later on. Well, the reason why this is something that is left the way it is in statute at the moment is because I know the original concern was always about ensuring that people would be able to still file for office and be a candidate, even if they lived in, say, a rural area that doesn't have reliable internet. And for providing this sort of solution is the goal. Now, that said, I understand there's definitely are additional checks we can provide. We could simply provide a multi-step process, essentially, like Representative Miller indicated, asking about access at a local library or things like that. But also, I don't want to require someone to go park in the parking lot of a Starbucks just to file their campaign finance report. Certainly, I think there are easier methods to resolve. But I certainly hear that concern. It's not my goal to erect barriers, but if there isn't enough checks with a simple representation of cause, we simply could add an amendment to require an affidavit, which frankly, that's how most other states who have recently adopted this requirement have proceeded.
Mr. Chairman, if I could follow up. Now, just so that I am clear, I think when you had testified last week, there's actually going to be two bills, correct? One was about filing for office, electronic filing for office. Is this bill just for filing campaign finance reports, correct? Or is it for both?
This is only for filing of campaign finance reports. Filing for office is something that the Secretary of State handles and is outside of our jurisdiction. So anything from appointing a treasurer to filing our campaign finance reports, that's our jurisdiction, and that's what we're talking about here. Filing for office would be something that would not be covered by this particular legislation and would not be, and is not part of our recommendation.
Representative Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And one quick comment before I get to my question. My heart does skip a beat whenever I get an envelope in my mailbox from your office. But the waivers go, is the waiver going to be like once the waiver is issued, is that good from then on out, or every time a report is due, would the candidate have to request another waiver?
That's a great question. So ultimately, that sort of thing would be something that we could either handle in reg. The current statute as written doesn't answer that question, how long the waiver would become effective. It's my view that if someone requested a waiver and was granted, it would remain effective until revoked, which the commission could say, for example, every year you would have to refile this or show cause again. However, as written, that requirement is not built into the statute. So once the cause is shown, when someone indicates they don't have that reliable access, then it would be sufficient for their reports from then on.
Thank you very much.
Representative Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I apologize, I'm not quite sure what's happening with my camera. I'm just going to ask a question, sort of comment. Director Skoglund, these questions you're getting may in fact be my fault, because if I remember right, when we were working this bill a couple of years ago, I think the little bit vague language about presenting any reason was what we amended to it, or what I amended into it on the fly. So I guess I just offered to the committee if we'd like to make it more specific. I'm sure we could work together.
Certainly. And also at the time that was added, I know that there were the concerns about rural internet access certainly have not gone away, but they are decreasing over time. This year, the number of electronic filers did go up fairly dramatically from previous years as well. So we're seeing that trend continue. But it's possible that concerns about rural internet access are becoming less significant than they were several years ago. That said, I agree with you. It's possible that something more significant like an affidavit or something like that may provide a further check on ensuring that no one attempts to use it for convenience, which I'll tell you in my interactions with candidates, most candidates are always just trying to do the right thing and trying to comply with the law, and those are that is the typical candidate in Kansas. They're doing their best. So I certainly hope no one would do that, but obviously I wouldn't object to adding an affidavit requirement into the cause or any other check that the committee determines necessary.
All right. Are there any further questions or comments of the conferee? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Executive Director. Are you going to remain on the line just in case we have questions for you on the next bill?
Yes. Yes, thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Let me know if there's anything I can help with at any time.
All right, thank you so much. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the proponents section of House Bill 2053. I'm going to go ahead and open up the opponents section of House Bill 2053. Are there any opponents that wish to speak? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close the opponents section of House Bill 2053 and now open up the neutral section of House Bill 2053. Are there any neutrals who wish to testify or speak to this bill? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close the neutral section of House Bill 2053, and that concludes the House Bill 2053 hearing. I am now going to shift us over to House Bill 2052. And as of right now, I don't have any proponents, opponents, or neutrals. He has neutral? Okay. Then we'll go through the cycle. So, all right. I'm going to open it up for the proponents of 2052. Are there any proponents? Seeing none, closing that section. Are there any opponents for 2052? Seeing none, are there any neutral? And we do have a neutral. So House Bill 2052, the chair recognizes Executive Director Skoglund as neutral testimony on House Bill 2052. Just as a side note real quick, Executive Director, I did go out and grab your testimony that you submitted last year to the committee, and I had the committee assistant send that email to all of the members on the committee. So we do have that file that was attached last year, so hopefully that'll help answer some of these questions. But go ahead, take it away, sir.
Thank you very much. My goal is to simply be available for questions and to clarify why I am not here as with testimony today. Last year, the commission made this recommendation because they viewed a violation of the law if legislative assistants received a compensation bonus because any state employee cannot receive additional compensation for something that they are already required to do as part of their job. For example, to use an example of an office with impeccable ethics standards, if a lobbyist were to attempt to pay a revisor to draft a bill in a particular way, certainly they could not accept that. The corruption evidence there would be rather significant. But the same applies to any state employee, something that's part of their job they can't receive additional compensation for from other than from the entity that is already paying them. So noting that there were some instances in which office assistants, legislative assistants were being provided bonuses at the end of session. This is a violation of the law, but the commission held off enforcement last year to allow the legislature an opportunity, a bite at the apple, to determine if there was, if they would like to fix the issue. Because the legislature did not pass legislation last year on this item, the commission does not include this recommendation this year. They've determined that the legislature has made the decision it has made and will enforce the legislation as written at the end of the last session. So that's why it was not a recommendation this year, but I am available for any questions, especially because this originated from a recommendation in 2019.
All right, I do have a question for you. So has there been any leeway or consideration given that last legislative session got cut extremely short and we did not have the opportunity to consider that full legislation?
I'll tell you that I did not send a single notice last year indicating that bonuses would be something that we would look into. And so we did not formally maintain the same prevention on enforcement that we did prior to last session. However, in practice, it resulted in the same understanding. And part of that was because of an understanding of the shortened or because of the factors that affected last year's session as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And then real quick, what is the penalty for if somebody gives their office assistant, let's say you guys were going to go ahead and start enforcing this and we don't pass legislation. If somebody gives their office assistant a $50 gift card to go to Longhorn Steakhouse, for instance, what would be the penalty that you guys would basically hit the legislator with or what have you?
So the penalty would actually apply to the individual accepting the provision of compensation, we would probably just try to resolve it at the outset by returning the gift card in that instance. That'd be something that would be very easy to avoid an enforcement proceeding. However, in an instance where, for example, someone were given cash that they've already spent when they have no way of refunding it, anything like that, then the commission could issue a fine of up to $5,000, and I believe it's also a misdemeanor as well in the law. I'm not saying, of course, the commission is understanding of circumstances and does not assess a maximum fine for no reason, but that is the maximum that could theoretically apply in these instances.
Okay, one more follow-up, I apologize. Typically, historically, since I've been serving here, every year a vice chair of the committee will go around and collect cash donations for the committee assistant in their efforts and in their work on the committee. Is that something that we should prohibit this year until we pass a law, because that could very well be enforced from you guys?
Yes.
All right, do any other representatives have questions for the executive director at this point in time? Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So can I take my office assistant out and cover her lunch? Is that a gift?
The prohibition is on compensation. In what the prohibition we're talking about here is compensation received. Taking out for lunch would not be compensation, so that would not be a problem. At this, because
usually I do that on a day that's been designated as Office Assistance Day or something, but can I get her a gift? I just can't get her cash or a gift card?
that is correct.
I cannot. Right.
You can get a gift of some sort. You could not give compensation. The gift would be subject to the gift law, but you don't have, it's not being given under circumstances in which you could be attempting to influence the behavior of the office assistant, and therefore would not be a violation of the gift law.
So I can get her a gift, but I can't get her a gift card.
Correct.
Well, that's pretty dumb.
The reason why this was something I brought up last year was because I cannot imagine a circumstance in which this would present circumstances where someone could imagine corruption occurring. And so this is why we brought it to the legislature and have not enforced it, because this is something that certainly does not appear to have the same problematic issues that you have in other circumstances where with individuals receiving some sort of extra bonus compensation or gifts.
Thank you. Appreciate it, in fact. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering about and I've been through, in the 2 years I've been here, I've been through 3 office assistants. The last one quit on me yesterday. But so I don't know if I'm that hard to work for or what. But in that instance, if say a office assistant has resigned their position and is no longer an employee, would it be okay to give them a gift card as a going away gift, or well, after they've already gone, I should say?
They'd be receiving that as essentially payment for work they performed as a state employee. It's essentially a bonus for that work. So the answer to that is no, that you could not provide that to them. Now, what has happened in some of these instances is office assistants will sometimes work for the campaign, and they can be paid in that capacity. But being paid a bonus and compensation because of their work as a legislative assistant is something that is prohibited under the statute as currently written. And I certainly am sympathetic, because I think office assistants do so much work. I know that today, I know that the committee assistant provided me a lot of support that in trying to assist in getting my testimony submitted, for example, today. So they do so much more work than they ever receive credit for. I can't imagine circumstances where people could perceive corruption. This is probably not the intended result of the statute, but we are obligated to enforce the text as written. And so that's where we run into this issue.
Well, I mean, I understand that, but like, if you remain friends with the person and like maybe a year or two later it's their birthday, you want to give them something for their birthday. I mean, is there like a time limit on that?
If it's not being given as compensation for work performed, then that is fine. That's the statute then would not apply. But simply the fact that they have terminated employment is not enough to say that this is not being given for that reason. So, for example, if someone left state employment and the next day they were given a $1,000 bonus because someone was incredibly generous, that bonus would be prohibited.
Thank you.
Representative Bourgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I signed on without video, and I can't figure out how to turn the video on now, so I'll try to learn that before our next meeting. I just wondered if someone could provide some information on where the $100 120 amount comes from. Is there some precedent? How did we decide that amount?
I believe that amount was decided by committee. It was not an amount that was suggested by the Ethics Commission.
Okay.
Correct. So I think that the $100, $120 amount is typically what is given or is the gift limit, I believe, and the executive director can correct me on that. But if some lobbyist or constituent or something like that were to give you a gift, they have a $100 limit. Past that limit, then you would have to pay for whatever else is for however much else that gift would cost at market value. Is that correct, Executive Director, or is it $40?
I'll clarify a gift is prohibited to anyone in the legislature, including legislative staff, if three different factors are all met. The first is if it's over $40. The second is if it's from someone with a special interest in the legislature. And the third is if it's given under circumstances where it could influence the behavior of the recipient, and which is usually a very low bar. But I think the commission probably would view that as something that would not necessarily apply when a legislator is providing a gift to a legislative assistant. I think that would be a different circumstance, certainly, than most issues that we run into with gifts that are given in the Capitol. I will note, those of you who are concerned right now, food and drink is exempt from this. A provision of food and drink is unlimited to a legislator, and recreation, if the giver is attending with you, the limit is $100. Most gifts, it's $40 if the other two items are also met.
Okay, so, and Representative Bourgeon, it's starting to come back to me now. So it's been a little while. I've slept since then. I believe the reason for $100 to $120 was because that if every member on a 23-person committee gives $5, that adds up. And so usually every committee member gives $5 to the committee assistant after we get towards a certain point in the session, and we thank them for their service. And so that's just a token of appreciation from the committee to the committee assistant for all the work that they do, because they put in tons of hours, weekends, nights. They work very hard to make sure that our committees run very effectively and efficiently. And so that was just our way of showing our appreciation. So I would say that it was $100 last year. It's $120 this year in the bill. And that is because committee members do give committee assistants usually a cash donation type of a deal because of how hard they work for us. So that's where a lot of that, I think, came from. And that's also why we have the limit, I think, where we do. Representative Bourgeon, do you still have any questions or concerns about that?
I appreciate that explanation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't want to sound silly, but this morning I gave my secretary a used jean jacket, and I said, keep it or give it to a friend. Should I ask for it back, or it cost me nothing? My wife wanted it out of the house, and I just asked her if she wanted it, and she took it. Should I ask for it back? Thank you.
So a couple of notes about that. The overall answer is no, you're fine. So I'm always glad to be able to give that answer. I don't get to give good news all that often. But the provision of a jean jacket in this instance would not be part of this law that we're talking about today because it's not being given as compensation. Compensation is a pretty narrow field typically. So we're really only talking about the gift law. The value of that jacket may be over $40. I'm not going to ask you for a receipt or anything like that. And the reason why is because the other two factors for prohibitions on gifts are it has to be from someone with a special interest in the legislature. Presumably, you probably do because you are a legislator. But it has to be also given under circumstances where you would be trying to influence their behavior. I have no idea what scenario could possibly be where a legislator would be potentially influencing an office assistant's behavior by the provision of a jacket. So I think that this would, by my informal guidance here, would be that that is not a violation of the gift law as written.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And what the director just said segues into my question. Why would we put a limit on this amount, period? Because what you just said, I agree with, and that is I can't imagine a circumstance where what we're giving the person who works for us, and this says individual legislator, in a way to improperly influence their work. I might be doing it to maybe help improve their work, but they work for the individual legislators. I appreciate the prohibitions on gifts. We don't want third parties giving things to legislators or people who work at the legislature for even the tacit influence. But I just don't see why we are worried about putting any limit. And I don't like dollar limits in statutes because over time they become obsolete and we have to change the law. But I'm looking for a purpose whatsoever to why we're putting a limit on this particular well-defined exemption. And that's somewhat rhetorical, but if you want to comment, Mr. Skoglund, I'd welcome your comment.
I think that the provision of a limit was legislative creation. I certainly don't oppose there being some sort of limit on it, but the commission did not take a stance as to whether a cap should exist, and if so, where that cap should exist. So I'd be remiss to provide any testimony in support or opposition to the cap.
Okay, you don't have a position on putting a limit. Do you have a position on removing the limit?
I do not.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions for the executive director at this time? Seeing none, thank you, executive director. We appreciate you providing neutral testimony and speaking to the committee.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
All right. And with that, I have no other neutrals listed. So are there any further neutrals? Seeing none, then I'm going to go ahead and close the neutral section. And then after that, I'm going to close the hearing on House Bill 2052. Does anybody have any bill introductions that they would like to provide at this time? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the committee for today. Thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend.